So my name's Ritchie Argue. I'm Director of R&D at Fuse Technical Group, as well as the LED lead for the ETC Virtual Production Working Group LED subgroup. Maybe there's more acronyms that go in there, but and I'm also a co-chair on the SMPTE RIS interop subgroup. So, Tucker.
Yeah, and I'm Tucker Downs. I'm the Research and Development Manager for ROW US, and also their color scientist. I'm also on SMPTE RIS, ETC committees, ESTA photometrics, people who talk about color. That's where I'm involved. So, and yeah, we have a lot of exciting things to show you today about some testing we did back in January.
So over the last 8 months or so, we've been working on evaluating LED panels and their performance specifically for on-camera use. This is not a traditional use of LED, so we really wanted to dig in and see what's necessary to really get the most performance out of them. We determined some key characteristics or metrics for how to think about LED on camera. Tucker and I, or mostly Tucker, designed a repeatable validation process. So how do we measure and actually do that evaluation? We ran a test in January. We gathered 12 panels from 8 manufacturers in this area. We really want to thank the manufacturers. Currently, we just got this data out, kind of crunched last week. We haven't vetted it with all the manufacturers yet, so they're anonymous. This is just going to be anonymous data for now. But I believe after we go through it all with them, we'll get it out if they're interested. And so we're in the analysis stage, and we're looking to publish, we'll present here and then publish a white paper on this as well. So as ETC, there's some objectives we're not trying to do here. We're not trying to provide a ranked list of panels. We're not the police of panels or recommending a given display. What we are recommending is specific target values or capabilities to achieve for use in this space. And we're also not looking to advise vendors on how to resolve implementation issues or improve their panels. That's their secret sauce. We just want to see how to evaluate their secret sauce and make sure it's doing what we're expecting.
Yeah, let's figure out what a good LED panel should behave like and how it should perform. How can we visualize its color performance?
So for cinematic use, LED displays are supposed to be a window onto a virtual world. They should really not add any characteristics of their own. They should present either the plate that you shot or the virtual environment as transparently as possible, as though it's just a window behind you, and ideally not a glossy window, just a magically transparent window in the camera frustum. The performance on camera is really more important than the performance to the eye. So one of the things we want to make sure we're not doing is evaluating that performance on studio or in the studio just with our eyes. There's things like the refresh rate that interacts with the frame rate of the camera that we can't see with our eyes, but it's critically important to the performance on camera. And they see colors differently as well. So what we're trying to achieve is the closer a display can be to a reference, so really reproducing the signal that's being sent into it, the more headroom there is for you as creatives to add that creative control and look development to the content after. But if you're spending all of the effort with your 3D LUTs just correcting the displays to perform to a baseline, that doesn't leave a lot of room to add that creative capability on top of it.
And one of the other motivations that I like to point out or think about is that it's very difficult to look at an LED panel with your eyes and say, yes, this one is going to look good on camera. People are doing that, and there are a range of products that do look good to your eyes, but we're still having a host of color problems on set once we get to footage. So these are some tools that we're looking at. How can we drill down numerically, objectively, and figure out, is this display performing, linearly? Is it getting quantized? Are the colors going to match from one shot to the next shot to next week to the next production? And this is kind of why all of these displays that we evaluated during our testing looked pretty good, but when you photograph them, they all look pretty different. So which one is correct? And it's really hard to know. And which one is correct, and can you apply a transformation to OpenVP Cal or other tools so that your footage is going to look correct? How do you do that? How do you determine? So that's what we're talking about today.
So we polled the group and put together a big list of characteristics that we're interested in. There was a lot of interest in color, so that really drove our selection of how we evaluated things. Obviously, there's lots of characteristics that are important to on-camera performance, but we are resource limited, and there's only so much we can achieve in a short amount of time. So we focused on these top 3 items that we picked out of another top 6. You can see there's a full list there. Apologies for the overlap. But you can review what we might have in store for future testing as well. And so, just to reiterate, the current metrics are based on historical LED display use. So pixel pitch is important, but it's not necessarily the most important. Same with brightness. Brightness doesn't capture contrast or dark shadow levels. So we wanted to really look at what's more important than what is traditionally reported on a manufacturer data sheet.
So a lot of times people will do testing where they'll look at a graph like this and they'll say, yeah, yep, the EOTF, that's the transfer characteristic of the display. It's perfect. You know, the blue dots are on the red line. It looks great. And then if you actually measure, you know, around 600 or 700 colors and figure out what was the luminance of those colors and was it the correct luminance, well, there's a pretty wide range of performance there on this particular product. So it doesn't, looking at this chart, a single chart, looking at a gamut, looking at one number, doesn't tell the story of all the colors that a display is expected to be able to achieve. So in our testing, one of the goals is to make these measurements and then boil the measurements down into units of like a just noticeable difference. Is the difference between this color and what it's supposed to be going to be visible? Is it important? So we want to use things like delta ITP or meaningful units of McAdam ellipses around colors to figure out our tolerances. In all of the charts today, we've selected a tolerance range based on that metric of close to 1 JND. And that's represented in green. 1 JND is a very strict limit. I'm not certain that that is actually necessary for all virtual production. So we've made a recommendation about yellow. If the performance is in the yellow zone, it's probably going to be acceptable, and red is bad. And for methodology, a lot of people are concerned, how do you even do this? Well, you need a test pattern generator and generate 10-bit test patterns and send the patterns through the full video pipeline and measure the outgoing color. So Fuse provided a measurement facility. We got over to their office in LA, set up panels. We had multiple people on site to assist, to supervise that nothing was being biased, to make sure the processors were configured correctly. And we shot, you know, our 10-bit test patterns with the spectrometer, around 550 test colors for each tile, and did the following analysis. For the white point accuracy, the goal is to be at D65, right? And to explain the JNDs around D65, we're referring to this ANSI standard, where ANSI is recommending a 4-step McAdam ellipse as acceptable for the architectural lighting industry. I like to think we're a little bit better or a little bit more expecting than the architectural lighting industry, but this gives you an idea of the scale of where we should be around D65, which is shown here on this blue triangle. This is a 4-step McAdam ellipse, which I believe is actually already in the red zone in our chart, which Ritchie will explain.
So on the McAdam ellipse, we measured 2 things. One, where the panel reproduces white along the locus, so whether it's warmer or cooler than what the target was. And in this case, we've represented that in this graph here that shows your 6,500 Kelvin target white point, and then luminance along the bottom. I think I cut the numbers off, but that's a log scale from 0 to 10,000 nits. And what we're capturing here is the drift, or the ability for the panel to hold that white point across the entire luminance range. So you can see at the top of this particular panel, the sample points are within the green band, so it's doing a very good job of representing the right warmth of the white. But as we get down, and the numbers here we'll see on the next slide, I think that's 1 nit down here.
1 nit.
Or that one's 1 nit. So 10 nits or 100?
Yep, 10.
So there's a couple points in the shadows that are a little cooler than they should be.
And similarly on this chart, these are both related to the white point. This is showing you the plus and minus delta UV, the pink and green variation of this LED tile. So as we dim from 10,000 nits down to 10 nits, this tile is tending towards the pink. No, the green. Sorry. No, the pink. Whew. It's confusing, I know. All of this PDF will be available in the reports, so you should be able to hopefully figure some of this out with our YouTube video after this. These are some of the notable results from the white point testing from various products. So on the left, we're showing one product that has very consistent behavior along the grayscale. Everything had the appropriate level of pink greenness, which for strange reasons is about 0.003. And it wasn't quite on D65. It was a little bit towards the bluish side of D65. But it's in this yellow zone. It's within that 4-step macadam ellipse that's recommended by ANSI. This tile tells a much different story on the right side. From 10,000 nits down to 0.1 nits as you go through a PQ ramp, well, it's extremely, extremely bluish and then gets very, very green towards the bottom end of that. For the next set of metrics we're going to talk about, we have to kind of talk about perceptible color differences and like what are the axes of perception. We try to break color up into 3 attributes: hue, chroma, and lightness. So if we have a target color that's shown here in the middle, if there's a brightness error, that's represented by this column. If it's too bright, it might look like this. If it's too dark, it might look like this. A change in chroma is represented here, and a change in hue is represented diagonally towards blue and towards red for this target color. So these attributes of perception get boiled down into 2 metrics, delta E 2000 and delta E ITP. Which is superior is up for debate by even like many professional color scientists. So we included both in all of our reporting. And we'll get into some of the maybe debate about those 2 things in a later slide. But to keep these axes, these ideas in mind when we start to talk about brightness errors and chromatic errors. So, you want to go ahead, Ritchie?
Yeah, so as we showed earlier, from a chart like this, it's really hard to understand where the blue dots are relative to the ideal line for brightness error. Again, we're plotting it using a green down the middle. If it's falling within that, then we're within that 2 JND step. As you can see, this particular plot's got a bit of a trend to it. So we do see differences between the manufacturers of how the brightness is reproduced across the range, and you don't get that information from a typical EOTF graph.
Yeah. This tile shown on the bottom here has relatively consistent, maybe a little bit incorrect, but consistent behavior that's easily correctable. This tile, much, much harder to apply a correction for. And again, just 2 more examples of that. A tile that has very reasonable and consistent behavior that a 1D LUT could fix, and a tile that has something really, really crazy going on for the ultra-saturated colors.
Okay, and this is a similar way of representing color error, chromatic error. Again, the traditional way is using a CIE chart and showing some samples, and we've got arrows here that show where we expect a color to be and where it would land. These are magnified by 10 times to make them visible, so those errors aren't actually that big on the color chart. But it's really hard to understand, and it doesn't capture brightness at all as well. This chromatic error chart here, again, we've got the brightness across the bottom in nits, and we can see that in this case, it's got better control on the low end, and then as we get up toward the brighter colors, there's more variability in the reproduction. This tile on the bottom here is more even throughout the range, throughout the luminance range. And again, that's not captured at all on the traditional chart.
And it's impossible to also tell that type of information just looking at the gamut coverage, saying, yeah, it's 95% of P3. Well, both of these have really good coverage of DCI P3, but one of these tiles is definitely performing more consistently than the other. And there's many examples of that in our data set. I want to point out here, when we were talking about the hue, chroma, and brightness as attributes of perception, this chromatic error is capturing errors in hue and chroma, and the other chart was capturing errors in brightness, which might be important to some people.
We got 3 minutes, so
Yeah.
I think we skipped this one.
Yeah.
So the last test we did is horizontal reflectance, and this captures the ability for a panel to reproduce black. So the LEDs are off, and it just needs to make a shadow as deeply as possible. So we set up a test with a spectroradiometer and a light source, capturing both a diffuse reflection, so the light source is off at an angle, and we're looking at the panel directly on, and then a sort of glossy reflection where we're measuring at the equal negative
The
45
specular
degree.
angle. This is what that looks like if you're actually going to practice this in your studio. Shine a big bright light at your LED tile and make some measurements with a reference sample.
So we found the median of all the panels we looked at had a diffuse reflection of about 4%, somewhere between 3.5% and 5%. There was one panel that was a glossy panel that showed really good performance on axis. So when you looked at it, it had a black level of 0.08%, but then off axis, it's glossy. It's sort of like a phone or a laptop screen, and it really catches those reflections, and that's not what we're after in a virtual production studio. We can't really control the position of all the lights and the camera, and we want to make sure we minimize those reflections regardless of the creative intent of the setup.
Yeah.
So we captured that as well with this glossiness ratio, and that's just a number that kind of represents how glossy, how much more you get a specular reflection than the diffuse reflection.
Lastly, you can boil all these fancy charts down to one number, but doing that is really inefficient, so I'm gonna move ahead on this slide. Look at the charts. They're much more valuable to you.
So just a quick couple lessons learned before we wrap up here. Don't underestimate the time all of this stuff takes. I highly recommend that you submit your panels to us, and we can help with that. We'll also ask for your help, too, probably next time. And then it's really hard to find good reference materials to be able to do this testing. So the standard evaluation material from the ASC is starting to help with stuff like this. Having a good test pattern generator and not trusting your eyes, just looking at random plate content is really helpful.
All right. Thank you. It's been a lot of really amazing data. If you want to download the data and review it, it's available on this URL. The data that you'll see is completely anonymized with no manufacturer names. But this way you'll get a view of the wide range of products. Oh, I'm in the way. Sorry. Yeah, we're going to do this again.